Regresamos a Vis con Bernd Wollschlaeger. Bernd, we were speaking precisely about your decision to undertake this journey to go to Israel after your conversion, or before it? Before your conversion?
After my conversion.
After your conversion. So there was an incentive there that you met a group of Jewish students in Germany, and something helped you to make the decision to make the Aliyah, to take the decision to go to Israel. So tell me a little bit more about that story. How was that?
When young people meet, they try to find out what makes you alike. And I must say, I like the Israeli girls a lot.
Oh, that's...
And one of them specifically, and we bonded. And it was a kind of this romance, this attraction on first sight. And we only had a few days together, but I bonded with her. I found a friend, a soulmate, so to say.
So you decided to visit her afterwards, and how was it when you met the parents? Because the parents at first started speaking to you in Yiddish, which is like a German dialect. And
That's
then
correct.
What happened? That was an interesting contact with somebody that had been, in your own words, please, what they had been survivors.
Well, I didn't know that both parents were Holocaust survivors. And the father had the number tattooed on his forearm, who showed it to me this first night I was in the apartment, and they invited me in the apartment. It was not that they were reluctantly embracing me, they invited me. They knew that I'm from Germany. And their father wanted to know what makes a young German to come to Israel, what makes a young German interested in Jews, and what do I know about Jews. And for me, it was a very emotionally overwhelming experience, because first time in Israel, first time in a household of a Holocaust survivor. What shall I say? What is expected from me? Because I was not personally responsible, but I have felt the guilt about it.
But did you understand that at that moment? Because something that I hear in this testimonies of the children of the perpetrators is this necessity to say, I am not my father. So at that time, had you that picture very clear, I'm not my father, because you speak about this guilt that you felt of the actions of your father. And in a way, I ask myself, were you trying to punish your father by doing these actions, or was it clear that you felt guilt and then eventually you moved beyond that guilt and you said, this is something that I really want to do on my own and that I think is good for myself?
I knew that I'm not my father, but I'm my father's son. So his character was imprinted on me, but I was evolving my own character. But we were intertwined. You cannot escape from your background. You cannot separate and say, I'm the new person, I have nothing to do with anything that my parents did, believed, whatever, because that is something that is imprinted on you. So I needed to untangle that. And of course I felt guilty. It's a collective guilt, shame. That is something that the children of my generation felt about their parents.
Exactly.
But I needed to go to a different level, because shame and guilt is something that can corrode your emotions, corrode your mind, corrode your heart. You need to move to a positive side of the shame and guilt. What can you do out of it? How can you give something to this world that your father's generation took away? That was my goal.
And then you find yourself in similar positions as your family. You winded up going to the IDF, to the Israeli Defense Forces, as a doctor. In a way, this tradition of going to the military, in a way you followed it, just in a different, with a turn.
That was not voluntarily, because
Yeah,
I became an Israeli citizen, and as an Israeli citizen I was drafted. And I didn't escape the draft, of course not, because it was an obligation that I took upon me as a new citizen of that state. But I found myself in a situation where I was standing in front of young Israeli soldiers as an officer, as a second in command, as a medical officer, in uniform with the officer's insignia on my shoulders. And I asked myself, what if my father would see me like that? I do look like him. I am like him. But what would they think about me if they would have known that I'm my father's son, the son of a Nazi who is suddenly standing here as a Jew, as an Israeli, in Israeli army uniform? That conflicted me to the point that I didn't dare to talk about it.
Exactly. And how does the story come to light in a way? It was the generation of your children that...
Well, my son, he has a Hebrew name, his name is Tal. He asked me a simple question when he was 15, 16 years old. He asked me, Dad, who is my grandfather? He demanded to know, he wanted to know, and he had the right to know.
Of course.
And I felt conflicted. How can I explain, not that I escaped from the truth, but how shall I explain to a nice Jewish boy that his own grandfather my father was long gone, was a Nazi, was one of those who killed Jews. And on the other hand, his own father is a Jew and an Israeli. That this conflict, what will he do with that conflict? And so I decided to share that with him. And the ball started rolling. The truth came out. And at that moment I knew I had to continue talking, because not only for myself, to find my own grounding, but for the sake of others, that they understand that I can give something to them, I can talk something about that is not only affecting my life, but may affect theirs.
Well, in a way, there is this Jewish concept of avon avot, which is, it's a very particular concept that you break the wrongdoing of your father in order to liberate the future generations, which is what you did in a way. So how did Tal take it? Did Tal take it well, or what happened at that point? Probably he was a teenager. How did he react to that story that all the kids in the class used to say, my grandparents were survivors, and here comes a totally fresh story and unexpected story. How did he take it?
Well, he took it so well that he shared it with others, and that's the reason why I had to talk about it. But
how did you feel about that? My God, you must have been
shocked, because I had to explain for the first time to others, to relative strangers, about me. And I was not ready at that point to share that in its entirety because of the very personal story. And they helped me, and my son helped me. And he asked me to write it down for him and for his generation and for those who will come after. And so I did, and in that process I connected to myself, connecting to my son, and connected for the first time to my family.
You never were in contact again with your father, or were you? Your father, what did he think about all this process that you underwent? Did you ever confer with him, or?
I left for good in January 1987. Never saw him again because 6 months later he died. He disowned me. He never wanted me to attend his funeral. It was written in his will, never to attend his graveside. And we were total strangers. So my father took it not well. He considered me as a traitor.
And your mother?
My mother's heart was torn in pieces. She was emotionally distraught that her only son leaves, and she knew that I would leave for good. And I left for good, even though I pretended that it would be for a short time, just to make it easier for her. And I saw her again, but she was already stricken by Alzheimer's disease, and we never really emotionally connected to the point where I think she could appreciate who I am now. But she saw her own grandson, my son, she saw at least.
How do you deal with this, with growing up with these conflicting versions? And then you have Klaus von Stauffenberg, that is also the memory of your father is always there with that of him. And what happens to a son growing up in a household like this? And how did you reflect that upon the education of your children? What did you do differently of what you saw in the education you had with your father?
I learned and I matured to understand that my father gave me very important elements of my character. My stubbornness, my tenacity, my discipline, on the one hand. And these are good, relatively good character traits that I applied in my daily life. On the other hand, I needed to separate the wheat from the chaff and separate his character traits, which were horrendous. His coldness, his emotionless, his inability to connect, even though he wanted to. And I knew he wanted to, but he couldn't. He couldn't step out of his own shadow. So I was the one, and I am the one, and I educated my children accordingly to be emotional, to step out of your own shadow, to shape and create your own life, and that it's possible, against all odds, to change. And that's not only a Jewish German story. And that not only affects the relationship of Nazis versus Jews. If that would be it, then we would miss completely the essential facts of life.
Exactly, and the point of your story, which is inspirational, and especially in the context that we're living where there are so many conflicts. What is the learning experience of your life in that point? What do we have to learn from you?
that we don't have to be the way we are supposed to be, either because of our parents or the demands of our group that we're living in or the society that we're living in. We are individuals and we can change the course of our own life. We can step out of this collective shadow, of this shadow of a family. And it can happen in any society, in any environment. I, for example, have Muslim friends, Arab friends, who stepped out of the shadow of their society and said, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be tagged with this image of I'm a murderer, I'm a Jew killer, I'm a head chopper, I'm a terrorist. No, I'm not. I'm a proud Muslim, and I want to live like a human being with a faith that I adore and respect. That is something that I admire in other people too, and that can happen in societies where horrendous things happen. How do children feel in Rwanda when their parents participate in the murders of hundreds of thousands? How did children of parents in Bosnia and Herzegovina feel when the parents participate in the murder of Muslims, thousands of them slaughtered on the spot in the 90s? How do children feel in Latin America, in Guatemala, in San Salvador, where mass murder happened? How do these children feel about their parents? And what do they want to do with their lives? Perpetuate the lies, perpetuate the denial, or want to become somebody else? So the reason I'm talking about it is to instill the hope that people can change. There is no fatalistic thought that you need to be the way you're born. No, you don't have to be. You can take your life in your own hands against all odds. Change is possible.
That's incredible, and that's so true. So thank you very much for being in Vis-a-Vis.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias y buenas noches, y no dejen de vernos hasta la próxima semana.